Hafa. Humanities Guam is very excited to partner with the University of Guam for this 38th presidential lecture. Thank you, President Kreis, and your team. They've been lovely. And thank all of you for joining us for this special event. Humanities Guam is very pleased to present I Come From Here, portraying place, community, and history, a series of creative writing and journalism workshops and readings featuring award-winning scholar, journalist, and memoirist Inara Verzemnieks. Tonight's lecture, The Many Words for Home, Writing to Capture the Complexities of Place, Identity, and Family, is one of 2 reading events to be held this week as part of the series. The second event is an evening with the author, which will take place at the Hyatt Regency Guam on Friday, February 15th. It'll be a night of readings, dining, and conversation with Inara. The workshops include a master class in feature writing for journalists, 2 college workshops in feature writing, a master class in creative nonfiction for writers, and 2 public high school workshops in creative nonfiction. So it's a busy, humanities-filled week, and we're very excited. This project is funded by a grant awarded to Humanities Guam from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation in partnership with Pulitzer Prizes and the Federation of State Humanities Councils, as part of the nationwide Democracy Informed Citizen Initiative. This initiative seeks to highlight the critical role journalism and storytelling play in the civic life of our nation, and for Guam, our island. Our aim in presenting I Come From Here is to inspire members of the Guam community to think deeply and creatively about their own complex connections to home, whether Guam, Micronesia, or the larger Asia-Pacific region. Based on the overwhelmingly positive response to the Master Class for Journalism that was held last night, and the high school workshop, creative nonfiction workshop this morning in Ukadu, I think we're succeeding. It's been truly inspiring to see how committed Inara has been in preparing for her readings and workshops in Guam. And it is also thrilling for Humanities Guam to have a writer of Inara's stature participate in our project and offer such a rigorous program. So thank you again, Inara, not only for your incredible scholarship and writing, but for your warmth and enthusiasm. And I want to thank Bernice Santiago of my staff, who actually introduced us and connected us with Inara. It's been really wonderful. It is now my honor to introduce the 11th President of the University of Guam, Dr. Tom Kreis.
Buenas and Hafa Day, and it's on behalf of the University of Guam, it's my honor to thank Dr. Kimberly Kaling and the Humanities Guam for bringing to Guam our guest speaker for the university's 39th presidential lecture. And I'm pleased that she could be with us here today after having to reschedule due to Typhoon Mangkhut in September. And it's also nice that the weather is so bad in Iowa, and it's such a contrast here, a pleasant contrast. Inara Verzemnieks is also a native of Tacoma, Washington, where Patty and I just moved from, and so we've just been comparing notes about a favorite place. So she is the author of the acclaimed memoir, Among the Living and the Dead, A Tale of Exile and Homecoming on the War Roads of Europe. She is also a 2007 finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in feature writing for her work in The Oregonian. Her other awards include the Rana Jaffe Award, the Pushcart Prize, and the Anslavs Eglitis and Veronica Janelsina Literary Prize. Not too far off, I guess. She teaches creative nonfiction at the University of Iowa, and the Iowa Writers Workshop is one of the oldest and most distinguished creative writing programs in the country and in the world. and it's consistently ranked in the top ranks around the world for creative writing. So please give a warm welcome to Inara Verzemnieks.
Hello, everyone. Hafadeh. Thank you to Humanities Guahan. Thank you to Dr. Kreis and the University of Guam and everyone here who put this evening together. And most of all, thank you for being here tonight. I'm going to have some remarks, a sort of traditional lecture that I'll also be weaving through with some excerpts from my book. So we'll be sort of dipping in and out of both lecture and literature. This morning, I had the distinct pleasure of leading a writing workshop for 16 students at Okado High School. I say it was my distinct pleasure because as a journalist, I always considered it a gift to be in the presence of another person's unfolding story. And now that same feeling guides me as a teacher, that it is a deep honor to watch as someone finds the words for the stories only they can tell. I gave the students this morning a writing prompt that at first glance might seem simple, but it never fails to reveal the hidden depths of our individual histories. And I'd like to pose the same prompt to all of you now. Imagine I am asking you to complete the rest of this phrase, I come from. How do you fill in the rest of the sentence? What are the first images and impressions that come to mind? How would you write the rest of the story that follows and fills in the spaces after these words? I come from. Here is how I would answer. I come from a family displaced by war and occupation, driven from their original home in the small northern European country of Latvia at the end of World War II by waves of successive conquering armies. My father's family lived for years as refugees, people without a country, before eventually settling in the United States. The political situation at that time, Latvia had been absorbed into the Soviet Union at the end of World War II, meant that they could not return home, nor could they communicate with their relatives. They were to be cut off from their beloved homeland, literally, psychologically, for nearly 50 years. As the first generation born in the United States, I grew up inside my family's longing for their lost home. I was raised by my grandparents from the time I was 2, and in many ways, they were still living as if they might one day be able to go back to their homeland. We spoke the language, we followed the traditions. I listened as they told and retold vivid stories of their lives, stories being the only way we could come close to any kind of return. Gradually, the stories of my family's lost home began to feel more real to me than the home where we actually lived, especially the stories of my grandmother, Livia, who was like a mother to me. Our true home, so the stories went, like the ones that my grandmother read to me at night from a battered edition of Grimm's fairy tales, the spine broken and held in place by tape, was far, far away. But we could never go back there again, nor could anyone from that world visit us to remind us of who we were and where we came from, though once my grandmother's mother had apparently shown up at our home, moments after her death, more than 5,000 miles away, but only my grandmother saw her. She emerged from the seam that runs between darkness and daylight to stand at the edge of my grandmother's bed as my grandfather snored and twitched beside her. It was the first time my grandmother had seen her mother in more than 20 years, and her face looked withered like flowers left in a vase without water. My grandmother opened her mouth to say something, but before she could speak, before she could form the words, "Forgive me," her mother leaned over and placed a calloused palm on my mother's curlered head. She let it rest there for a moment, then she disappeared. My grandmother seemed to accept the brief terms of this visitation. She too, as I understood it, had disappeared just as quickly from her family's life, though her vanishing had been the living kind, born of war and panic, the heavy trundle of red-starred tanks over cobblestones, airships swimming overhead, flames where roofs should have been, and from somewhere nearby, the sound a building makes just before it crumbles, a whoosh of air, like a breath released from a cracked sternum. Alone, with 2 small children, her husband away at the Russian front, my grandmother had monitored the climax of the Second World War from a rented apartment in the Latvian capital with an address of 71 Peace Street. Between the quiring of the bombs, she breastfed her newborn son, my father, and hoped she could remain in one place long enough for her body to heal, for the bleeding to finish. But as the glass in the windows rippled, and it became clear she couldn't wait where she was any longer, she dropped diapers into a sack and tied a scarf around her shoulders. She picked up her 3-week-old son, made her 2-year-old daughter clasp her hand, and ran. As she had explained it to me growing up, there was no time to write a letter, to address it to the family who waited 3 hours east in the town of Gulbina, in a brown shingled farmhouse where my grandmother had been born and where she had left only a few years before, the first in her family to venture beyond its boundaries for a new life in the city. The day she left the farm, her whole family had accompanied her to the train station, still in their milking boots, and they'd cried and waved at my grandmother until the train finally pulled beyond view. Now, there was no time for my grandmother to say goodbye to her mother and her father and her brother and her sister, no way to tell them where she was heading, because even she had no idea. It was too late for her to do anything except to try to stay on her feet and ahead of the Soviet troops, thousands of them marching behind the battle standard of the USSR, red silk-screened with hammer and sickle, Latvia's new flag. I know now that my grandmother left Latvia at the beginning of October 1944. It was late June 1945 when she finally crossed into British-occupied territory in the north of Germany. There, she and the children were officially registered as displaced persons, ultimately assigned to a refugee camp on the outskirts of the port city of Hamburg, where she and the children sometimes went on day passes to pick through the firebombing's char, burned brick and pooled metals, searching for things to trade that might fuel their cook fires. But when she was alive, my grandmother never emphasized the length or the difficulty of her journey across Europe, what she might have seen in her memories that she wished she could forget. And while the stories she told implied great difficulty and sorrow, she erased them of the grim particulars, made them archetypal enough to feel memorable, recognizably powerful, without exposing me to the specificity of her own traumas. A friend from Riga joined me, she would say, to help with the children. We slept in the woods at night and dried diapers on branches. We looked for farmhouses and offered to help with the cows in exchange for milk, a place to stay. Her story existed for me only in simple outline, like the life-size portraits we made in elementary school art class by lying on our backs on a blank expanse of butcher paper while the teacher traced our jittering bodies, our physical presence in the world suggested through negative space, the hollows held inside the lines. In much the same way, I accepted the presence of what went unspoken in my grandmother's war stories as evidence of something that did not have to be made explicit in order to be understood. She did not have to say terror or shame or anguish for me to feel these things too, as clearly as if they were mine. My grandmother, Livia, chose instead to speak about the place she had left, or she had never left. Over the years, as she lay on her pallet in the refugee camp where she would live so long after the war that she and my grandfather could trace the years by the addition to their family, 2 children becoming 4, 2 boys and 2 girls. As she clutched the family's passports and entrance papers to the United States and felt the transport planes rising, its wings tipped to the sea, my grandmother never stopped saying the name of the home she had lost. Tacoma, she practiced as the smell of the mills punched through the cracks in the window of her new home, an apartment in a downtown tenement where the volunteers from Tacoma Lutheran Family Services had indicated through gentle pantomime that the family of 6 now lived. But that word always remained unsure on her tongue. It would never sound as natural as the way she said lembi, which she had first learned from her grandfather, a shoemaker from the town of Gulbene, who eschewed whiskers but let his eyebrows grow like cumulus clouds. The name he had bestowed on the 2-bedroom farmhouse he built under the shelter of 2 maple trees. There, he raised his only child, a boy, who would grow up to become my grandmother's father, a man of waxed mustaches and a fine way with hops, known for the batches of ale he kept in the granary, always enough to lend to a wedding or to a wake. My grandmother's mother was 10 years younger than her husband, and everyone agreed that she possessed the patience required to ret the farm's flax and spin its fibers into linen so fine and soft that it felt weightless. Yet she was also quick to snap a switch from the nearest tree if she sensed the slightest misbehavior. This was the world my grandmother Livia was born into, where landscape was lineage, and the span of a life would be measured by all that was held within the farm's boundaries. There, she knew it was summer by the smell of fresh-mown hay, fall when the saffron milk caps rose from the decay of the forest floor, spring by the storks winging overhead. Each day was organized around the rhythm and habits of the cows, and almost as soon as my grandmother and her siblings could walk, they were toddling barefoot behind the slow-hoofed cortege as it mouthed its way across the pastures, and they remained with the herd until evening, when it was time to drive them back to their places in the barn. The children did this for years, back and forth, stall to pasture, until they had spent more time in the company of cows than any other living being. Long after my grandmother had settled in America, she would visit the dairy barn at the state fair, wandering the labyrinth complex and appraising each cow with tender eyes. Always there would be a cow or two that stirred something close to rapture in her. "Oh, how beautiful," she would say, standing unself-consciously in her heels among the splatters, taking care to address the animal directly. "What a fine cow you will be." My grandmother spent more than a decade not knowing what had happened to her family and to the farm after she fled Latvia. Even when she was finally able to reestablish contact with her relatives in Gulbene, communication was sporadic, halting, the letters subject to censors' eyes. How far away she felt from the days when she would sit with her family in the kitchen of the farmhouse, everyone nursing cups of her tea, replaying the events of the day. Often it was a catalog of nothing. Maybe a heifer had been born with a broken mouth. A cloud had passed overhead in the shape of a girl. The bees seemed agitated. Now, as she sat alone at her kitchen table in Tacoma, crying over the pages of the latest stilted letter, there was a part of my grandmother that understood she could never return to that place again. But there was also a part of my grandmother that refused to accept the idea that she could never return to that place again. In the end, my grandmother decided to try to find a way to occupy the space that bordered both realities. Until the day she could return to the farm, she would rebuild it in America, board by board, through memory. At first, she did it by herself, silently setting the survey lines. She raised the sky just far enough overhead so that it felt as if you could reach up and brush your fingers against it when you lay on your back in the grass. She smoothed the fields out to the edges of the horizon and then summoned the forests, dense and dark. Behind the screening branches, she placed the anthills and the badger burrows. Orchard sown, she replanted the gooseberries and currants and let their rows grow unruly, vines curling back on themselves like the ends of her father's mustache. She staked the stems of the lolling dahlias and drove posts for the picket fence deep into the soil, but still, it would list. She bucked hay into the loft and stacked logs for winter's approach. But since this was a world summoned entirely from memory, there were places where the landscape dropped away without any explanation, sudden chasms of white space, unresolved constructions. The milking barn contained stools, but not a single churn. The horse grazed endlessly, reins dragging through clover. Outside the kitchen window, lilacs bloomed, regardless of the season. This is how I knew someone had died. My grandmother would pull her paring knife from the kitchen drawer and head out to her garden to cut calla lilies, carrying them to the funeral cupped in the hollow of her hand. This is how she soothed me back to sleep when I woke crying, the same hollow of her hand cupped against my cheek. I began living with my grandparents following the collapse of my parents' marriage, a bitter coming undone that had left them both emotionally incapable of caring for me. In my mother's case, it was also a legal ruling, her parental rights clipped, like the car she once steered off the road in a haze of drink. Custody was awarded to my father, the infant my grandmother had delivered as the bombs rained down on Riga. But my father, for his part, was lost in his own anger and sorrow and silence. 5 years home from Vietnam, and he remained as tightly locked inside himself as the day he returned, just as his own father had done a quarter century earlier. My father's not speaking was much quieter than the not speaking around the war that existed in the rest of my family. He went to work, he went to school, but he seemed somewhere else, somewhere far away. And so my grandparents made a place for me in their home while he tried to find his way back to himself. Where once I had known only one word for mother, now there were two. My grandmother was the one who took me to the backyard and showed me how to find the sweetest raspberries hidden in the shade of the trees. She was the one who set me on a chair in the kitchen, draped an apron around my neck, and let me sink my fists into the warmth of rising dough. She was the one who said my name over and over again until it sounded like a song, the one who took me in her lap and comforted me after I spent hours on the porch with my little blue suitcase, waiting for a mother who promised but seldom came. For as long as she lived, my grandmother never spoke to me about my mother, about what she did or did not do, what had happened or not happened in my earliest years that I would need to live apart from her. And I never asked, as if I agreed that this was something that should not be given voice. In the region of Latvia where my grandmother was raised, there are people who believe even to this day that the right words, spoken in the right combination, are a way of resurrecting what has been lost. Or, as an old man once asked me, did I know that there were times when words could become more than words? It's true, he insisted. Words can become as real as anything we see with our eyes or feel with these hands. I saw a man put out a fire using only words, he said. The house was engulfed and they'd run out of water, but then the man arrived and he walked in circles around the house, one way and then another, repeating something into the flames. This was how my grandmother sounded when she spoke to me of her former home, the farm she had rebuilt from memory, like someone who believed that the structure of it could be protected, even saved, through her retelling. Yesterday, I was sharing this story of my family and war and our lost home with some local journalists. And one of them said, "Oh, there is a word, a Chamorro word, that I keep thinking of as you're speaking. Mahalang. Mahalang. A love for home bound up with sorrow. A longing for home that carries both the burden of loss and the responsibility of recovery. For those who are displaced, occupied, exiled, for those who must leave as a matter of economic survival, for those who must leave in order to grow into the kind of people who might be better able to tend to their homeland on their possible return, they all carry the heavy knowledge that once they leave, a single word for home will never be adequate again. And it is the same, but in a different way, for those who stay behind, who must learn how to live with a part of their heart forever beating outside their body, who must learn to be physically present in one reality, while also always trying to imagine themselves into the life of their beloved far away that they can never share. What is the word for the home you visit in your yearning that you will never set foot inside, where your lost family lives? How can we find an adequate way to give voice to what it means when a person must choose between home and survival, when all you want is for them to be one and the same? What is the word for homesickness for a place left, just as you left it, which can also be homesickness for a place as it never was? Or homesickness for a place maybe you've never seen, but which your family kept alive for you in the diaspora through language or food or faith or story. And then there is the homesickness of the one who returns after a long time away, only to realize that home as you knew it could not wait for you in your absence, that to come back is not the same thing as stepping back into your memory of home as you left it. To know the strange simultaneity of still yearning for what has seemingly been restored. A few years ago, after my grandmother had died, missing her, needing her, I embarked on a journey to return to her lost village, to try and call back to her history, to try and find the home I had always known through her, but had never seen. I found her younger sister still alive, sharp and strong at 81, and I was immediately swept into the embrace of her extended family of children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We ate, and we ate, and we ate, which is actually a little like my first few days in Guam. We drank, and we cried. And then I asked to go see the family farm of my grandmother's stories, the farm called Lemby. And now back to the book. In the quiet that follows my question, I can hear the shrilling of sparrows outside, the exaggerating yipping of a puppy. Through the window, I glimpse the dog's silhouette, pawing and biting at the shadows the birds cast as they swoop over the lawn. The puppy belongs to Ausma, that's my great aunt, Ausma's daughter Ligita and her husband Ivars, a man with the ability to cultivate the kind of mustache the ancient fathers from the photographs would have admired, an encyclopedic knowledge of what it means to be self-sufficient, down to milling his own wood by hand in a shed at the back of his house. The puppy is a German shepherd who was found abandoned, starving, in the parking lot of a nearby hamlet, where Ligita works as a bookkeeper, signing checks for pensioners, writing receipts for library fines paid in change. Gone, I think I hear someone say over the cries of the dog and the birds. I wait for more, but the silence continues to extend between us, drifting like a fine mist of wood released by Ivars' saw, until it occurs to me that no one feels comfortable giving me the words for what this means, that they need me to discover it on my own. I'm just curious about the place where my grandmother grew up, I say. I have no other expectations, if you could just show me the way. And at that, the room seems to contract with relief. Off to the car we trundle, including the youngest in our party, a 2-year-old girl named Liva, which I think to myself sounds so much like my grandmother's name, Livia. She is shod in rubber boots, trying with unbending knees to out-trot the puppy who pursues her open-mouthed, grinning, desperate to lash her with its tongue. From the car window, we see storks gliding to standing in the overwintered fields, legs the color of the hottest coals, puncturing the last rhyming seal of snow. Here, smoke hanging above a chimney, weak, bowing like the vertebrae of a grandmother with a bad back. There, a pile of hay, gray with rot, a cat belly crawling through the mud, stopping to shake its paws with the fervor of someone trying to revive feeling in cold, numbed extremities. Once, an old man, glimpsed briefly, deep in a forested stretch, untamed woods, pathless, tugging a grocery cart. When the car finally stops, we step out into a landscape that holds only still air, the hush of a place that has begun to forget what it is to hold a conversation with anyone other than itself. And then, the house emerges from behind a screen of weeds. I recognize it in the way that one can sometimes briefly recognize in the face of the very elderly, all the versions of every age they have ever been. From the outside, it is exactly as my grandmother described. I study the front door, which hangs easy in its jamb. It feels as if it could have just been slammed shut, maybe on an angry tomcat, tail switching, stolen milk still wetting his chin. And I'm thinking how remarkable it is that the house still appears to hold the shape of its memories when I begin to register that something is in fact off, like a person who tells a passable story, only to repeat the same story a few minutes later, unaware of what he has forgotten, of what is skipping inside of him. I skirt the edge of the house, and as I approach its flank, that's when I see what has previously remained hidden. Something has gored the roof. Slivers of wood, greasy strands of insulation, they dangle at the edges of the hole like flaps of cartilage. Back here, it smells of larvaed water, steaming animal. All the while, the family leaves me alone to my discovery. They stand at a respectful distance at the edge of the property where the last of the unmelted snow has drifted into swells, rock-studded and stubborn, resistant to the thin sun. I'm grateful that they didn't try to define the scope of the loss for me. And yet I can feel myself crying before I can register why. At first, I think it's because I'm mourning the fact that I've come too late, that I will never step into a real-life version of my grandmother's recreated idol. But then it occurs to me that I am in fact crying in the way someone does when she is relieved of a burden. Earlier, when I had been speaking with my grandmother's sister, Ausma had said, "You know, your grandmother's stories aren't my stories." And when she'd first said it, it had made me sad, frightened even, that there would be no way for me to make the pieces of the past fit together in any kind of way that could ever return it to something whole. Each summer when I was a child, my grandparents sent me to the forests of Washington to search for a way back to our lost country. For 2 weeks every year, until I was in my mid-teens, I attended a camp designed to immerse the children and grandchildren of the local Latvian refugees in a living version of the refugees' collective memories of home. Conjured from the woods of Olympia, Washington, the camp sat on a property purchased with pooled funds, a real estate transaction within the local refugee community's reach, because the land, while beautiful, abutted a state correctional institution. There, in the cool stands of evergreen, I dressed in folk costumes and learned traditional folk dances and wove bookmarks by hand in the colors of the Latvian flag, which we raised each morning while solemnly singing the national anthem. English was prohibited. I remember doing a spirited session of aerobics one afternoon, all the instructions yipped in Latvian. On this subject, camp rules were strict. Each English word uttered meant 10 push-ups on the spot, and we all lived in fear of being called out in this way, of ending up face down in the dirt. Occasionally, exceptions were made, such as for the music to which we learned to dance, my hands on a boy's bony cow hips, our teachers shouting 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 in Latvian, as we twitched a dizzy polka to ABBA's greatest hits. At the end of each day, after the sun had set, we circled the dying campfire, clad in our Nikes and OP shorts and stinking of bug spray, and we clasped hands and swayed and sang a sad, slow folk song, begging the wind to carry us back to the shores of Latvia. Then we crawled into our beds in dormitories built to look like replicas of the old wooden farmhouses of the countryside, like Lemby, like my family's farm, that the refugees had abandoned when they fled. The camp's lake held crawfish in its shallows, their shed skins skimming the shore, cracking beneath our curled toes, but also leeches, which we learned to unlatch from our bodies with the touch of lit matches. In this way, year after year, we came to believe the past was a place that would always wait for us. We were too young to know that there is a difference between the exile's memory of home, which remains perfectly still, immobile, as if encased in a carapace, and a homeland's memory of itself, which drags itself from the shallows each day, molted, tender, new. And now the sun is sagging, snagging the tips of the pines, making what is left of Lemby appear as if illuminated from within, the fading light finding every breach. There's an awful beauty to this moment, arriving finally at the scene of one's past and discovering only ruin. And yet, ruin resists simple affirmation, forces us to place questions over certainties, to surrender what we had imagined had always existed, to ask instead, what if? What if? The most accurate resurrections of our histories depend not on their preservation, but on their constant, quiet disassembly. What if we told ourselves that ruin is really a reclaiming, a natural revision of what's always been assumed? What if I had come here sooner? There would have been more for me to see, but there also would have been less for me to find. From somewhere behind me, I hear the baby stomp and squeal. When I turn to look, she's reaching for something balanced in the crook of a sapling, a nest, abandoned, fraying. In ruin, edges vanish. Everything touches. She is, it occurs to me, the same age I was when I went to live with my grandmother. I've continued to return to Latvia, visiting every year now for the past decade. I've tried to describe to other people what it feels like when I'm there. It's like my DNA is singing, I've said. A friend from the Philippines listened to me once describing how I felt, and she told me that there's a phrase in Tagalog that she translated as blood jump or jumping blood, the intense physical feeling when you meet someone with whom you have instant recognition. Something inside you knows you're connected, even if you've never met. Recognizing someone who is your home in the world. I worried at first that this book was one that I could not write. I did not deserve to write. What did I know of war? I had not lived through war. What did I know of the country and its history? I was not born there. And yet, there's a way that the Latvian language makes a specific distinction between Latvians who live in country and those who are Latvian, who are bound to the country, but who must live beyond its borders. After World War II, the country lost almost a quarter of its population as people fled or were exiled. Even today, Latvians leave by the thousands each year to go find better paying work in other European countries or abroad. There are genuine fears the country is dying as so many young people leave. And recently, there have been concerted efforts to try and help bring those who've gone away back home, including offering citizenship to the descendants of those who fled in World War II, like me. It amazes me still to think that language, in response to the forces of history, can make space for a word that acknowledges the strange, beautiful simultaneity that so many of us know. How one can be of a place, even as one must also live apart from it. But if one eventually returns for good, can they ever go back to calling themselves by the same name as those who never left? I've come to think that I'm not sure I would want to lose the complexity of a word that allows me to be both and, to feel responsible for doing what I can to repair the rifts of the past, the loss of home, while at the same time knowing that without those rifts in history, that loss, I also would never have felt the overwhelming aching joy of my blood jumping in recognition of what I had never and always known. I would never have felt myself restored to myself. I would never have found the words. Thank you very much.
And this concludes the 39th presidential lecture. Thank you and good night.